If history is any guide, the probability of several, if not many, of the countries in the West devolving into dictatorships by mid-century, if not sooner, is extremely high. Civilizations are fragile. Rising unemployment caused by automation and AI, economic instability via globalism, and debased fiat currencies, unsustainable debt, why not throw in climate change in there as a perhaps, shortages of drinking water in many parts of the world, and never-ending mass culturally transformative migration will most likely implode much of the West. And in the subsequent chaos and total lack of social cohesion we are importing, there will inevitably be calls for order and assurances of renewed stability, but there will be a cost. Democracy will most likely die a quiet death, and the freedoms that we're already losing daily will all but be washed away. History has been recorded for thousands of years, and thus surely we must be able to glean something from it. Or so this is the assertion of Sir John Glubb as delineated upon in his book, The Fate of Empires and Search for Survival. To summarize his thesis, humans do not learn from history because their study of it is superficial and or prejudiced. His study led him to the conclusion that 250 years, or about 10 generations, was the average length of national greatness, and that this average has not varied for 3,000 years. He also arranged the stages of the rise and fall of great nations as follows. Empires begin when small groups of people violently burst onto the world scene. This pattern, which Glubb sees as being aided by poverty and lack of traditions, has been replicated from Alexander to Muhammad, from the Mongols to the British. This outburst period is marked by the spreading of new customs and habits, think tea time, as well as new ways of thinking. During the outburst period, there is immense displays of courage and great energy. For example, Alexander was able to topple the Persian Empire and march his way to India with only 40,000 men. The Arabs as well took Spain with only 12,000 men. From there, the success of empire leads to an age of commerce. What follows is a replacement of the pursuit of glory and conquest with the adventure of pursuing money. During the age of intellect, education is all about producing mandarins that are able to maintain the status quo. It is a time when the empire, while sapped of its overall strength, still wields enough to keep its vassals in check. Also, intellectualism in and of itself does not help empire, as many people become increasingly lost in elaborate and increasingly hypothetical arguments, and educated debate is not what empires depend upon, but instead on decisive action. And this is the high point of empire, and is followed by the age of decadence, which is marked by defensiveness, pessimism, materialism, frivolity, an influx of foreigners, the welfare state, and a weakening of religion. Glubb identifies the causes of decadence to be the result of too long a period of power, selfishness, love of money, and the loss of a sense of duty to nation. Now, examine how Glubb detailed the age of decadence and compare and contrast this with our current paradigm as is being enacted in the West today. He maintained that material wealth breeds defensive positions as people have something to lose and are wary of risking too much. It is at this time that duty is abandoned, selfishness is rife, and people forget their predatory past, or are made to feel ashamed of it, as we are in the West today, and not only forget, but welcome predatory peoples in vast numbers through the gates of empire. It is in the decline via decadence that vast numbers of foreigners arrive. Glubb, who spent the better part of his life in the Middle East, was clear that these people are not inferior, but they are different from the original people that built the society they are arriving in, and thus constitute a weakness to the nation in 4 ways. They are different in nature to the original people. They form their own communities that seek to protect their own interests rather than the nation as a whole. The new people arrive at the tail end of empire and arrive at a period of national strength, but when the empire falters, they resurrect old grievances. And most importantly, they are loyal only in times of stability. As a nation becomes ever more atomized, it becomes ever more fractious, and groups place their own political interests above those of the state. And as domestication via the political process increases with institutions, so political hostility between groups spills out onto the streets. Does any of this sound familiar? Also, the heroes of a declining society are people such as singers, actors, and athletes, not statesmen, academics, or philosophers. The Romans demanded free meals and games, or bread and circuses. Again, think to the cries for an ever-expanded state that provides its citizens with everything they need, as well as people's obsession with sports ball. Soccer or football matches' outcomes are elevated to the level of national crisis, when in fact they are grown men that have nothing to do with the local communities they represent, kicking around a ball to the howls of other men, and doing so for millions of dollars. And sports balls, as well as its players, have been elevated to national obsessions. Also, marked examples of civilizational decline is the abandonment of sexual morals, as well as the increase in the importance of women. Glubb in his book went on to note that quite soon after the outbreak of feminism, whether it be in the Arab empires or ancient Rome, public order within the empire collapsed. Also understand that 7 empires have disappeared in the last 100 years. The collapse of empire or strong states is something that is basically predetermined from its birth. As monopolies do not last, so too for empire. The 4 major ones being the Ottoman, the Austro-Hungarian, the French, and the British, and the 2 shorter than average, the Japanese and Soviet, and the 1 false start, that being the German Empire. While both the Japanese and fledgling German empires were extinguished by war, in contrast the Soviet Union, which was a very unique and historically odd example, lasted very much shorter than the average imperial lifespan and imploded upon itself, was most likely due to the fact that the Soviet Union itself was predicated upon very unnatural institutions that were based in rigid ideology with no inbuilt flexibility. It was an empire most were not happy to reside in or proud to be part of. When we look upon our Tinder hookup, sports ball obsessed, cowardly submissive, politically correct, feminist, emotion driven, decadent societies currently being flooded with people arriving from incompatible cultures who did not have any hand in the building of our societies, but at the same time being told we must constantly apologize for the success of those same societies that hundreds of millions clamor to force their way into, and then continually make demands of the original group that created everything, does anything of what Glubb outlines with regards to other empires and their decline sound that far-fetched? Also, when looking at the prognosis of the European Union, they are in the midst of a particularly bizarre experiment. The EU is attempting to achieve empire via economic unity, but will never be able to do so as they are ancient rival states rather than vassals held together via the yoke of empire, while at the same time adding a belligerent and hostile 5th column. Thus, as increasing economic instability as well as the social tensions that exist between groups that are now currently being forced to share the same space, the fractious nature of our current society will at some point in the near future no longer be able to be held in check via bread and circuses. The center will not hold and a political vacuum will be created, and nature abhors a vacuum. If current conditions are not addressed by the political class and censorship of the kind that we've seen just this past week is the only response to the legitimate grievances that people have, and the majority continues to cower in silence, then the end of our period of decadence and decline looks to be the same as all other great civilizations that came before, as we seem incapable of learning from the past. However, our society now has the ability to distribute information and organize in ways that no other people have had in human history. Either way, the time is now. We dance with the frivolous at our great peril. The cancer that is spread throughout every part of our civilization will be terminal if not treated. We need to take offensive positions and lose our fear of speaking out against the currently insane state and media enforced paradigm. In the coming troubles that have been brought upon by decadence, we will hear the inevitable calls for order and assurances of renewed stability. But as always, there will be a price, and yes, maybe The experiment in universal suffrage has run its course. Adjustments will have to be made along with new ways of problem solving. It's either this or the alternative. That alternative being the desire for a cheap iPhone and the fear of being called illiberal in the face of moral decline and decadence will, unless we reignite our societies, and I believe we can, it will be the epitaph etched on our civilization's tombstone. Sorry for the number of black pills in this video, however, sometimes it's necessary to hold up a mirror to something that nobody wants to see nor speak of, but I have to believe that we can do this. Thanks for watching, and till next time.